May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. What a day. A service from the 1892 prayer book, an adult baptism, and a celebration of 113 years of being Christ Church together. But first, I want to welcome baby Moses and his parents to church as we mark our anniversary. Nothing that has happened in the life of this congregation in all these years will be as important and spirit-filled as what is going to happen in this new baby's lifetime. Our best days are ahead, and Moses will be there to see many, many of them. Now, that's not to say that the great things haven't been taking place on the corner of Brooklyn and 47th for over a century. Actually, we didn't start here on this corner. The idea for the first Episcopal church north of the Cut was hatched in the living room of Mrs. Alice Rowlett Coe at her home on the corner of 45th and 15th at a meeting in 1899. At that time, Seattle had only Trinity, St. Mark's, and St. Mark's new mission, St. Clement's Church. And Episcopalians moving into these new northern suburbs of Roosevelt, Latona, and Evergreen thought they needed a church of their own, and they approached the rector of St. Mark's, and he agreed. So Dr. Lloyd, St. Mark's rector, held the first service on All Saints' Day in 1903. We first met in the afternoons at Mays Hall, which was an auditorium over a drugstore at the corner of East 42nd and University Way. The congregation that became University Baptist Church had services in the morning and in the evening, and we sandwiched our services in between those two Baptist services. In a very short order, George King, a Scotsman, was appointed vicar by the bishop. The diocese bought this plot of land, and Reverend King began building the church. Literally building the church. He was a carpenter. Wherever he had gone in the mission field, he had actually built the church buildings that he was serving in. Some people said he was sort of like our Lord. And with a few $100s in volunteer help from the newly convened congregation, our first building went up on the corner. Mr. King served until 1909, and he was followed by Willis Stone, who served from 1909 until 1921. And he was the first to start our student work at the new university. He'd brought on 2 young priests who later went on to serve churches in Seattle. And so I imagine it's safe to say that there never has been a day since that day that our involvement with the university wasn't central to our life. Now, sadly, Mr. Stone died suddenly in 1921. And here's an interesting story. As a memorial gift to honor his passing, Hall House, which was a nonprofit boarding house for Episcopal girl students at the university, made a donation of $1,000 to pay off the mortgage on the building. It was Bishop Keeter's tradition that you couldn't get your church consecrated until it was debt-free. And so a few months later, in December of 1921, our church building, this building, was consecrated. But what that really began was what I call a period of building musical chairs. When we built this church building on the corner where there had been a little church built in 1905, they physically moved the old church to where this church now is and made it the Parish Hall. That continued until 1931 when we leased the north lot to the Shell Oil Company, and a gas station was built there. And so they moved the old church from that part over to this part, and they gave the building that had been the original church to the YMCA as a gymnasium at the corner of 52nd and Roosevelt. Well, later in 1953, the gas station came down and the new community building education center went up, and it needed to go up to accommodate a fast-growing congregation because there had been a big surge in membership when Walter O'Neill became the rector after World War II. Figures like 62 baptisms in 1948 and 81 in 1949. Someone at the 8 o'clock service was one of those baptisms. So I was looking at the archives on the decision to build the new building, and I thought it was fascinating. The bishop and the church raised the money before they knew what they were going to do with it. On the docket were plans to sell this property and start a church a little farther north, to tear down this church and build an entire new church center, or to simply build a new church education wing. And that's what finally was decided, and the church house was dedicated in 1953. Downstairs at coffee hour, I'll show you an incredible drawing of the master plan for the behemoth brick church that they intended to put on this property. Thank God we saved our beautiful sanctuary. With the new education building, we became a true student center for activity at the U, and we became a breeding ground for priests. It's incredible the list of new priests who came out of this congregation during the 40s and the 50s. I actually talked to Charlie Forbes and his wife this week. Charlie's a priest now in his 90s, but he had served as a campus minister here back under Ainsley Carlton, who was rector from 59 to 71. Charlie and his wife were in charge of outreach to the grad students, and they used to hold potluck dinners in their home for the married students who were using Christ Church as their church home during their studies. Now, to know more of our history, you can see our wonderful, excellent oral history project that took place during our centennial celebration. And ever since our founding, we've remained the Episcopal Church's official presence in the University District. And in that capacity, we've tried a number of different models for reaching students and young adults. And starting in the new year, we will once again take ownership of Episcopal campus ministry, along with financial support from the diocese. A great team's been put together to work with our rector, Shelley Fayette, in this new effort, and they got off to a good start last week when they served a meal to the young people at Covenant House. And there'll be plenty of more opportunities for hands-on support for our campus ministry. Well, while it's fun to look back at our past with a nostalgic eye, life has not always been a bed of roses at Christ Church. I spent a fascinating morning rummaging through the diocesan archives with our archivist, Diane Wells. And up in her attic lair, we dug through boxes and files that contained the history and artifacts of our 113-year history. Lots of fun facts, lots of good news, but also a few juicy stories from our past. There was ample evidence of our share of struggles and controversies, and I want to highlight just a couple. And both of these came in particular during the time when Paul James served as rector, from 1922 until 1942. The first document I found was this one, language from a 1931 piece that came out of the bishop's office at that time. It was titled, "In the Matter of Christ Church Parish in Seattle." And it says, assuming the facts to be that the parish has not paid to the diocese its assessment or apportionment for several years, has not paid its pension fund premium for a long period, if at all, and that it not only makes no consistent effort to make these payments, but assumes an antagonistic attitude toward the diocese, all in nonconformity to the canons, providing for said payments to be made. Also, that the parish is delinquent in the payments of the rector's stipend, and perhaps delinquent in the payments of current bills. In addition, a promissory note executed by the parish payable to the diocese has not been paid according to its terms or at all over a period of many years. In view of the foregoing, the query is, what ecclesiastical action is open to the diocese to induce the parish to meet its obligations to the diocese? And as an alternative, what ecclesiastical action is open to the diocese to force a remedy? What indeed? The document gave two: close the place, sell it and pay the debt, or demote it to mission status. But the parish had another idea. Remember I said about the Shell gas station? The new Shell gas station saved the day. Cha-ching! Bills were paid and life went on. But sadly, only for a little while. Poor Father James seemed to have trouble from his first day to his last. When the Depression hit, we could no longer afford the rectory, and so Father James, he insisted on being called Father, a shock to those low church people here at Christ Church. Father James was forced to move his family into the church basement, hanging sheets to cordon off sleeping space for the family. The church had dwindled down to a handful in reaction to Father James' high church ways. I'm wearing a cassock and surplice and stole, which is what the priest would have worn in 1903. But Father James switched to albs, like the Romans, added a rood screen, and started a third service with chanting, incense, sanctus bells. And as I said, he insisted on being called Father. Now, our former rector, Steve Garrett, did a history of this church, and he was actually able to interview some of the old-timers who had been there during the time of Father James. And he wrote, "Long regarded as a low church parish, Christ Church reacted badly. The liturgical innovations prompted many parishioners to leave. One parishioner I interviewed considered Father James to be more Roman Catholic than Anglican, and he added, after the chaos of James, the church virtually closed down." Father James died of a heart attack shopping on University Way. Louis Bailey, who at that time was the rector of Trinity, made a surprise announcement to his parish that he was going to move to become the rector of Christ Church. And he served us for the rest of the time during World War II, but then his own wife died of cancer, and he decided to leave. So the church in the 2 years after World War II found itself broke, demoralized, and down to a handful of people. Then Father James' widow sued the church and won. The church had to pay a settlement equal to $200,000, money the church simply didn't have. Here's a passage from the senior warden's letter to Bishop Stephen Bain, a brand new 39-year-old bishop who'd only been in office for 2 months. "Dear Bishop Bain, Christ Church is in more difficulty. With the budget already in excess of income, the parish without a rector, the organist about to resign because our organ is worn out, and the church now facing an $18,000 judgment, the vestry considers that a real state of emergency exists. As a number of the vestry see the situation, we must either double our pledges or sell the church property." Needless to say, we didn't sell the church. Instead, the new bishop joined the church in a fundraising drive. They called Walter McNeil from the Diocese of Wyoming as the rector, and they put the church back on track. It didn't hurt that it was at the beginning of the baby boom generation. But with the calling of Walter McNeil, a new day dawned, the church rebuilt, and with the aid of the many faithful members of that greatest generation, the elders, some of you who came here as young people, remember, the church was put back on a steady course. So yes, there are wonderful days to look back upon, but some of the most important lessons we learned from the more sobering experiences that we have. And besides, our past is only prelude to a brand new day here at Christ Church. After my time with you, I truly believe we are right now writing the most exciting history this congregation has ever known. And while parts of today's worship point to the past, the central symbol of the day, this baptismal font, points to the future that is already unfolding before our very eyes. Today we baptize June Sue. June is the future of the church. Seekers finding their way to a faith that doesn't require them to unlearn their Christianity. People in every walk of life searching for meaning and mystery and finding it here in the Episcopal Church. So now, let us baptize June into the faith, and in renewing our own baptismal covenant, let us commit and prepare ourselves for the next 100+ years of service here at Christ Church.